Hello everybody, I am Hoofer, and welcome to episode 1 of my Roblox Luau learning course. For this episode, we're going to be going over some fundamentals of Luau, what it is, how is it different from other languages, and we'll be going over how exactly to write basic Luau code. So to get started, let's talk about what exactly Luau is. So Luau is a scripting language derived from Lua 5.1. It has some features backported from future versions of Lua, but it is an advanced version of Lua that is faster and has optional typing. Typing allows you to make more defined and rigid code. It makes your code easier to read, easier to understand, but it has a bigger learning curve compared to automatically set typing. The wonderful thing about Luau is it is simple to understand and read, yet extremely powerful for what it can do. It is fast, efficient, and it's easy to understand from a quick glance. In Roblox, they have 3 types of scripts. For this episode, I'm only going to be going over 2 different types of scripts. We have server scripts, as well as local scripts. Server scripts are scripts that only run on the server side. Local scripts are scripts that only run on the local side, or the client, the player, etc. This allows us to have security as well as authority over what can happen in our game. The interesting thing about scripts is how they separate your code. This server script right here, for example, would not interact with what happens inside of this script. There is ways to make this possible, but we're going to get into that in a later episode. The wonderful thing about writing code is how simple it is to understand from a fundamental level. It's like giving the computer a list of tasks to do, and we only want to do some tasks in certain scenarios, and maybe we want to group tasks to do multiple times over and over again. So everything happens from top to bottom, all the way down, and we have different scenarios, kind of like talking to a computer, like writing a sentence, telling it what to do. This is a very basic script, and we're going to learn how to do this sort of stuff in today's episode. Alright, let's get started with making our first script. Now in this episode, we're only going to be experimenting with server scripts. We will get to local scripts in a later video, but for now, I think we should just stick with the basics. So in Roblox, there's generally 2 spots where you want to keep server scripts. We have server script service and workspace. I'm not going to get technical into it, but for now I'm going to stick to server script service for this example. So we're going to go ahead and click server script service and create a script, like such. And you should see a new window open for our script editor. So to begin, you can see that the script editor starts out with print hello world. We will get more into functions later, but right now, let's just understand that this prints hello world to this console right down here. So we tell this to print hello world. It's kind of like writing a sentence. So let's go ahead and delete that. And we are going to be starting with variables. Variables have 2 things. They have a name and a value. I'm going to create an example variable here. Variables begin with local to signify that they are in the local scope. That's a little bit more advanced, but that's a basic explanation for why we write local. After that, we add the name of the variable. So for this variable name, I'm going to write example name. Okay, we have a variable, but we don't have a value. So let's go ahead and give it a value. And we do that by writing an equal sign. And we can put whatever we want in the value. I'm going to create a string, and I'm going to write me there. So this is a very, very bare bones variable. It is an example name, that's the variable name, and its value is a string that says hey there. Strings are surrounded with quotation marks, and that's how you signify them. So there's a few basic data types for different values in Luau. We have strings, as you can see here. We also have numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Numbers can also be decimals, aka floats. So in Lua U, numbers are both integers and floats. Integers are whole numbers. Floats are numbers with decimals. So they are combined. They are one thing. We also have Booleans. A Boolean is a true. A Boolean is also a false. So a Boolean can be true or false. It is basically like saying yes or no, true or false. One of the last fundamental data types is nil. Nil means nothing. It's null, it's undefined, it is non-existent. There is two ways we can directly create a nil value. We can either do it by directly assigning it to nil, or we can assign a nil value of nothing, like that. You just write the local value, and it's set to nil automatically, like magic. So these are some of the basic data types. Roblox has a lot more data types, as well as Lua U. There is a few more that I'm not going to get into quite yet, but we will learn about that soon. All right, now that we've created some different values, let's figure out how we can do operations on them. Some examples for numbers, for example, are addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, etc. Let's start with that. We can create a number1 variable, and we will assign that number1 to, let's say, 12. Now, we can create a added number, and we can apply an operation to it. So let's say we want to take our number1 and add 12 to it. Well, we just take our variable name, which is number_1, like such, and can add another thing to it. We could either add another variable, or we could add a number. So let's just do 40, like such. Now, added number would be 12 plus 40, which is 52. So this would become 52. Another thing we can do to variables is modify them. So let's say our number that is 52, aka added number. Let's say we wanted to add -5 to it. We could say added number equals added number plus -5. This would modify added number to add -5 to it. We could also write this, instead of doing plus -5, we could just do -5 and do the subtractive operation on it. Lua U has a feature to do this operation in a more condensed form. Instead of doing added number equals added number -5, we could also do added number minus equals 5. This is exactly the same as doing added number equals added number minus 5. It is just added number minus equals 5. The exact same thing. I'm going to go ahead and create a few more variables real quick, just showing off all of the possible operators there are for numbers. So the first operator we have is addition. The second operator we have is subtraction. The third operator we have is multiplication. The fourth operator we have is division. The fifth operator we have is floor division. The sixth operator we have is exponentials. And the seventh operator we have is modulus. So these are all the operators you would use for numbers. All of these operators can also be used with the assignment with the operator before it. So for example, we could say op7 percentage equals 1, and that would run percentage 1 on this equation here. Moving on from numbers, we can go on to strings. Now strings are pretty awesome because, like numbers, they can be added together. We can define a string like this. remember we have to put them around these quotation marks. We can also do, similar to addition, concatenation. Now concatenation is applying two strings together. So we can create a con string, which just means concatenation, and we can say string1. Instead of using the plus symbol, which would in fact not work, this would throw an error. Something bad, it would make your code not work. Instead of doing plus, we want to use dot dot. Dot dot is how you concatenate strings. So I can take string1 and add space world. That means const string would equal hello, comma, space world. That's what this will turn into. Now, just like how we use this operator equals, we can do the very same thing for concatenation. We could take const string dot dot equals, and let's just add an exclamation mark to the end of our hello world. This would change the output of const string to be hello, comma, space world, exclamation mark. So it would add an exclamation mark to const string. There is more operations we can do on strings and numbers using functions, but we will get to that in a separate episode. Moving on to Booleans. As previously mentioned, we can create a Boolean by either writing true or false. I'm going to create a Boolean that is false. Now we can change the status of a Boolean by either overwriting it to be true, or we can use something called not. Not takes the current value and makes it opposite. So if we used not false, this would mean true. It would say, what is the opposite of false? It's true. The same could be applied to true. Not true would mean false. We can do this with variables as well. So if we take our bool1 and assign it to be not bool1, if it is true right here, what would the opposite of true be? It would be false. So that would turn bool1 into false. The other thing I want to briefly go over is the nil data type. I'm going to create a nil value, and I want to just show off how the not operator can be used for nil values as well. We could assign nil value to be not nil or not nil value. Now, taking our logic from the Boolean, running not nil would be just true. It would turn that nil into true, because the opposite of nothing, it has to be something. So we're just going to make it true. So nil value would become true. So why exactly do we use variables? Variables allow you to structure your code in an organized way, and they also allow you to store important data. They're a way of keeping memory of what's going on, and that's very helpful in the programming world. They also make things easier to read. Think back to how I was discussing how writing code is like writing sentences. It's like giving a task. Variables make that a lot easier for you to understand and for other programmers who may see your code. Moving on from variables, I want to briefly go over functions. So we understand how to define variables, run operations, all that. But how do we make things actually happen? So Roblox and Luau have their own predefined functions. Functions are something we can call, provide parameters, and other information that can be used to have actions occur within the game. For example, thinking back to when we first created this script, it started with a function called print. Inside of this print function, when we call it, we pass in hello world. Hello world is a string, and it is what we want the print function to output to our console. So we can use this not just with constant strings that we provide, but we can also provide different variables. For example, we could create an example string. I will just call it example string. And we can pass that inside of print. So it will take our example string's value and provide that as an argument for print. So print's parameter is a message, and the argument we're providing is example string. So if this were to run, it would output to our console down here, example string. So we know about built-in functions. How do we create our own? Why do we want to create our own? We want to create our own functions in order to block our code into reusable sections. This makes it easier to read, easier to maintain, and makes things less repetitive in your code base. In order to create a function in Luau, you begin the function by writing the word function. After that, you provide the name of the function. I'm going to call my function example function. Then you provide parentheses to block it off with an end statement at the end. Provide the end of the function. These parentheses are where you input your parameters for the function. So think back to print right here. We have a message parameter. Our example function could have different parameters. In this situation, I'm not going to have any parameters. Inside of our function, we can write our code that we want to make happen. I'm going to make my function print hey there. There we go. We have our first ever function. How do we actually call that? It's pretty self-explanatory. If you think back to how print works, you just write the name of the function and put some parentheses. So let's go ahead and do that with our example function. All we have to do is write example function, then add parentheses. And now this will call the example function. We can call it twice if we wanted to, and now it prints hey there twice. Something to understand with scripting is how there's a scope. A scope is basically how variables can interact with each other depending on where they're located. For example, if I created a variable under my function, I named it local test variable, and assigned it to a string, for example. If I tried to put that into my function right here, you can see that it underlines. This is because you're trying to print a value that doesn't exist. This is because it's under the example function, so it cannot access that. It's out of the scope. We could fix that by moving it right here above the function, and now it's able to access it. The same thing sort of applies to functions. If I were to create a variable inside of my function, that would be fine, as long as I'm using it inside of the function. But the second I try to take it out of the function is when it will no longer work. You can see the underline appears again, because I'm trying to access a variable that doesn't exist. Alright, now let's make a function that has some parameters. For this function, I'm going to make a function that adds two numbers. I'm going to call the function sum, and for the variables, I will have number underscore 1. Add another parameter, I add a comma, then write the name of the second parameter. I ensure that I create end to signify the end of my function. And now we can write our logic. We can create a variable for the summed number, and we can assign the value for that to be number underscore 1 plus number underscore 2. This is our summed number. Now what exactly can we do with that? Well, functions have a property called returning. We can actually take this variable and return it. You don't have to limit returns to be variables. You could also return constant values. But in this case, we want to return summed number. Alright, let's try this out. We'll create a new variable. We'll call it sumTest. And I will call the function and provide the two numbers we want to get the sum of. Hit 5 and 3. Now, since we returned something here, sum test would equal 5 and 3 as our arguments. It would be number 1 plus number 2, which gets returned, resulting in this being 8. So sum test would be 8. But if we wanted to, we could make our sum function log what we're adding. To do that, we could go back to our handy dandy print function and use string concatenation to display what we're doing. So we will say that we are adding, and then we will concatenate number 1, our first parameter. We'll add a little plus symbol string. We will concatenate our second number. We will add an equal sign string. And then lastly, we will display our summed number. So now when we run sum 5, 3, we'll calculate the summed number. It'll print I am adding number 1 plus number 2 equals summed number. We'll display that to our output, and then it will return it. And then sum test will be assigned to 8. Exactly in that order. Now, what if we want to only have certain actions happen under specific criteria? Thankfully, Luau has a way to do that. They're called if statements. If statements are defined by writing if, and then the criteria that you want to meet. We're going to modify our sum function a little bit to be different. I don't want my sum function to have a negative answer. We can use the less than criteria for numbers to check if our summed number is a negative number. To do that, we would do our if statement, then we would provide our number variable, and we can use the less than symbol to signify that we want to check if something is less than, and then we want to see if it's less than 0. If it is less than 0, then we would want to print I do not want a negative sum. And then we could just return 0. Now let's say I don't want my sum to equal 10. Just 10. I don't like the 10 sum, so I want to return 0 instead of 10. Then we could use the Elseif statement. The Elseif statement basically says, if this isn't met, do this. Oh, well, we want to just do another if check. So let's check if summed number equals 10. Notice here how I have 2 equal signs. When you're checking for an exact match, you have to use 2 equal signs. If you don't, Luau will try to see this as you assigning a variable. That's why we use 2 equal signs. Like our normal if statement, right after our criteria, we add then. We can add our nice little print statement saying, I do not like the number 10. Return 0. We could also use the else statement on its own if we wanted to. I could make this return -1 or something. But notice how if we return something, this won't happen. Take a moment to think about this. We're running an if statement. This is not met. This is not met. Well, then we go to the else. The else returns. It's done with. The function's over. How could it possibly get to right here? It can't. It's physically impossible. It could if you had one of these return statements not here. This would just continue. It wouldn't return. But in this case, all of the above happens. There's also a few other different operators we can use for if statements. I'm going to show a few of them right here. I'm going to create a variable right here. I'm going to assign it to 10. We can check if something isn't a value. For example, if number test is not equal to 5, then number is not 5. So we use a tilde and then an equal sign and then our value to check against. So we're saying if number test is not equal to 5, then we want to print number is not 5. The other ones are different number operators such as greater than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Just a bunch of ways to check different things. You could also check directly if a Boolean happening. This would always happen because true is always yes. In fact, all of these different criterias result in Booleans. You could even assign these to variables. We could say 10 is not equal to 5. This would result in this variable becoming true. This all exists so you can make the logic for your games or projects and actually connect it all together and make it work in the way you want. The last thing I'd like to go over before we move on to a homework challenge is commenting. So we have all this logic and actions happening, but we want to be able to note down what exactly is going on. We can do that by writing 2 dashes and writing our message. You can also create multi-line comments by doing 2 dashes, 2 brackets, as well as 2 closing brackets to signify the end of the multi-line comment. So we can write multi-line comment. These are very helpful for making sure you understand your code in the future. A common mistake many people make is not writing comments on their code, coming back to their code later, and not fully understanding what's going on. You can also write too many comments to the point where it becomes very hard to understand what's going on because you're flooding yourself with lines and lines of text. It's important to create a perfect balance between the two. Ensure that you have understandable sections, but not to the point where you're overflowing yourself with different notes. Alright, here's our example piece of homework, as I'm going to call it. I want you to open up Roblox Studio yourself, make a new script, and try to solve this problem on your own. I am going to show the solution, but I don't want you to look at the solution until you give it a shot. It is completely okay to be wrong or not be able to do it. I just want you to get an understanding of trying to solve problems on your own. This will make you a great scripter, a great programmer, and it will really help you push yourself to be able to make what you want to create. So here's our problem here. Billy has 6,000 coins and wants to purchase a sword that costs 2,500 coins. What I want you to do is create a variable for Billy's coin balance, which would be 6,000. After that, I want you to check if Billy is able to afford the sword. If he's not able to afford the sword, I want you to print that Billy is not able to afford the sword. If he is able to afford the sword, I want you to remove 2,500 coins from Billy's balance and print out his new balance. Alright, I'm going to give you some time to start doing this. Go ahead and pause the video, and I will go ahead and show the solution here in a moment. Okay, I'm going to show you how I would solve the problem. Not all solutions are the same. You could have solved it in a completely different way, and it could have been completely correct. There's more than one ways to solve a problem. Some are better, some are worse, or some are even just completely the same. So let's start out with creating a variable for Billy's coin balance. I'm going to call that balance. I'm going to assign it to 6,000. It says he has 6,000 coins. Now we need to check if Billy is able to afford the sword. We can see that the sword costs 2,500 coins. And we can actually do an if statement to check if Billy's balance is less than 2,500, the cost of the sword. If it is, that means he's not able to afford the sword, so we have to print that out, because that's what it says to do. I'm going to go ahead and print Billy, we're not able to afford that sword. Alright, we have the setup for if he's not able to afford the sword. If he is, we can just write an else statement to signify the alternative to the if statement, the alter criteria. If it is, we need to deduct 2,500 from his balance because he purchased the sword pretty much. So we will use balance minus equals 2,500. So that will take the balance variable and subtract 2,500 from it. Lastly, we can go ahead and print out Billy's new balance for him. We'll say print Billy, your new balance is balance. And there we go. That is the solution code. I can go ahead and run it here. And you can see right here, it says, Billy, your new balance is 3,500 because he was able to afford the sword and it purchased it. If he was not able to purchase the sword, for example, if I set his balance to 1, it would output that Billy, you are not able to afford that sword. Alright, that sums up the first episode for my Roblox Luau learning course. I hope you found this video informative, and I plan on working on more episodes to teach you how to learn Luau for Roblox. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I will go ahead and try to answer them to my best ability, and I'm sure others will be able to help you as well. Remember to have fun while working on this. Create your most epic desires. That's the whole point of learning the code. Thank you for watching.